too.
Good morning. It's so wonderful to see this many Unitarian Universalists in one place in July. This is amazing. Wow. And I want to extend a really warm welcome to St. John's Unitarian Universalist Church, and we hope that you have a wonderful time with us today. And I know we're going to be at your congregation next Sunday, and that's going to be absolutely wonderful. And so welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Krause, and I'm going to be your worship associate today. And our mission is to welcome all with love, to support learning and spiritual growth to serve our wider community, and to work for justice, equity, and inclusion. In that spirit, we acknowledge that we live and worship on land that was forcibly taken from the Miamia and the Shawnee people, who were the descendants of the ancient mound builders, who had elaborate mound facilities in the basin area where our downtown is today. This is a reminder that justice does not come with cheap apology. It comes when we deeply listen to those who suffered from the injustices of the past and commit ourselves to work alongside them in productive ways that move us all forward toward a better world. We're honored today to have Homer Shadowheart from the Urban Native Collective with us today, and he's going to bring us the message. And later in our service, I'm going to formally introduce Homer to everyone. And he's going to address the many paths that we all can walk together to build that better future. I want to remind you we have a potluck after church today, and even if you did not bring food, there will always be plenty of food. That's the wonderful thing about a potluck. It seems like the food magically expands to meet our needs. So please stay and enjoy the company of each other. Please make sure you read the announcements and inserts in today's order of service, where you can find important information regarding accommodations and upcoming events. The flowers today are given to us by Yvonne Gagnon, and it's in honor of her family members who are no longer among us. And so our hearts are with you, Yvonne, with the giving of these flowers. Thank you. So before we begin our service, we typically wave to everybody who's watching on YouTube. So let's wave to those watching on YouTube, and we also greet each other. I will bring us back with the ringing of the singing bowl. So let's welcome each other. this is going to be loud, so cover your ears. Lily Plummer is going to light our chalice, and we'll have her light the chalice, and then I will read the chalice reading. So go ahead, Lily. Here, let's turn it that way. Do it again. We almost had it. It takes a village. Thank you, Lily. For the generations of indigenous people who survived being hunted, who endured the theft and destruction of their people's lands, and who persevered through the theft of and indoctrination of their children, we are grateful that you survived. We are thankful for the resilience you have passed on to your descendants. We acknowledge the power of your examples of resistance, resilience, and survival in the face of genocide. Because you did these things, you are still here among us. For the activists who stood against corruption and who forced a spotlight onto your people's mistreatment, we are grateful for your commitment. Because of that commitment, you are still here among us. For the people who never consented to the sacrifices that were and are forced upon you, we remember you, we mourn your suffering and loss, and we honor you as best we can. We do this because you are still here among us. For the future generations, we ask you to remember, to learn, and to grow. We look to you, the future generations, to keep our collective people's future alive after we're all gone. We ask ourselves and you to find strength in all our ancestors and use the resilience of all people to create our future and that of you, our children. We ask you to ensure that when we are all gone, through you, we also will still be here. Our opening hymn today is number 1073 in the Teal hymnal, and it is called "The Earth is Our Mother." And we're going to, just in the interest of time, only sing the first 3 verses. So if you are willing and able, please join us by standing and singing.
Once, there was a man who was gifted a piece of land he didn't actually want. He wanted to travel the world, and so he asked his friend to take care of the land while he was gone. And so that first year, the friend planted and waited for his friend to return, but he didn't. And so the second year, the friend got some livestock and tended the land and waited for the man to return, but he didn't. And so the fifth year, the friend started a family and made a home out of the house there on the land and waited for the man to return, but he didn't. And so at 10 years, the friend replaced the roof on the house and figured this friend was not returning. And he settled in. Until 20 years has passed. And the man returned and said, hey, thanks for caring for my land. You can go now. What? Said the friend. No. I've been caring for this land and its animals and the home here. It's mine now, surely. Well, no, said the man. I was gifted this piece of land. It's mine. Just because I haven't been here doesn't mean it's yours. And the two, who had been very good friends, started to argue. And they argued, and they could not settle whose land this was. And so they called for the wise man of the village to come and settle their dispute. And the wise man listened to the man who was gifted the piece of land, and he thought. And then the wise man listened to the friend who had tended the land, and he thought. And he said, well, this certainly is a conundrum. I'm not quite sure what to do here. He said, I know. I'm going to ask the land. And so he got down and he listened. Strange, right? But he listened. And he listened for quite some time, that the man and the friend started to look at him like he was rather strange. But finally, the wise man got up and said, I know. The land has told me who it belongs to. And they waited. And they waited. Well, who is it? They asked finally. Well, actually, said the wise man, the land said, neither of you own this land. You belong to it. And that is how the story goes. I wonder what you thought of that story. All right, I'm going to ask our children to join me in their class.
Each month, we have a Share the Plate, where we share our offering with other organizations who we want to build community with. Jan Conley is going to be talking about the Share the Plate for this month.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Doing well, hopefully. And I'm here to talk about the Share the Plate today, which will involve You the Vote. And although it's about voting, it really ties in with today's service because what the organizations that we're going to partner with, that we need money for, want to represent the underserved people in our nation, including people of color, indigenous people, poor people, and so on. Do you remember the fantastic energy we had in 2022 for the midterm elections? I do. We organized and wrote so many letters and postcards. In fact, our small congregation wrote 1,996 postcards. And you know what? We were joined a bit, we had a little bit of help from St. John Unitarians congregants too. How many of you here today participated in that effort? Raise your hands. That's great, great showing. Vivian Klein, who is in her late 90s, is Vivian here today? She's in her late 90s. 2 years ago, she wrote 200 postcards by herself. Yes. How did we get involved in that campaign? We joined You the Vote, a well-organized national campaign working for the advancement of justice, accountability, and equity in voting. The work is not partisan, it is prophetic. Our UU faith and values call us to grow a powerful pro-democracy majority and change the material conditions of communities. Postcard writing was then and is now just one aspect of UU the Vote. If you go on and look at their website, you will see a myriad number of activities that they do, and it's year-long, not just about this general election that's coming up. So we are partnering with them. They partner with the Center for Common Ground. In order to participate in any significant way, we need to purchase their special postcards and postcard stamps. And postcard stamps are now 53 or 57 cents each. So we need some money for that. That's what Share the Plate this month will go for, the purchase of those postcards and postcard stamps. When will we begin to write? In August. We're launching our postcard writing campaign in August. You will hear about the particulars then. For now, we just need to be concerned about the funding. Those postcards that we and others across the nation are going to write will be mailed to voters in key states who are often overlooked and ignored. As I mentioned it just briefly before, Black, indigenous, and people of color, older, poor, and rural people, young people, those who are just beginning to vote, people in voter suppression states, infrequent voters who are unaware that they have fallen off of the voter rolls. With those 1,996 postcards that we wrote for the midterms, we did good. We did very good. Considering what's at stake this year, we have to believe that every single effort that we make at First Church for this postcard campaign will help make a positive difference. The positive difference that we're hoping against hope for. As my grandmother would say when she scraped every food jar clean, every little bit added to what you've got makes a little bit more. And as activist Congressman John Lewis said, we have to find a way out of no way. Think long and hard about that quote. Make it your chant. Say it with me now. We have to find a way out of no way. Make it your chant. I hope you dig deep for the Share the Plate donations this month. Stamp prizes have increased, and we'll need lots of postcards for what I know will be another fantastic effort that I'm affectionately calling First Church's Big Fat Find a Way Out of No Way postcard writing campaign. Start conditioning your hand to begin writing, and don't let a fear of writer's cramp get to you, and don't let Vivian Klein put you to shame for outwriting you. Let's all contribute to finding a way out of no way.
Mother, I feel you under my feet. Mother, I hear your heartbeat. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Mother, I hear you in the river song. Eternal waters flowing on and on. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Father, I see you when the eagle flies. Light of the Spirit gonna take us higher. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh.
Before I ring the singing bowl, I want us to remember the life of Frank Carpenter. Early on the morning of July the 4th, this past week, Frank transitioned to another reality. He struggled mightily in those last few months, but his spirit will remain with us. He was a gift to both of our congregations. And so, as we sit in silence, we remember the Reverend Frank Carpenter. For our reading today, I'm going to be taking an excerpt from a speech that the Shawnee warrior Tecumseh gave to William Henry Harrison in August of 1810 at Fort Vincennes. William Henry Harrison had been on a campaign as the governor of the Indiana Territory to purchase land for the settlers who were moving their way west. And he was purchasing land from the Miami and from the Shawnee and making promises that he knew full well that our government would never keep. And so Tecumseh understood that. And Tecumseh understood that sacred ground was being lost, just like it was in downtown Cincinnati. That was sacred ground that the Shawnee protected and cared for until the settlers came in and leveled those mounds and built a street grid. So in this excerpt, he begins, "Brother," addressing William Henry Harrison, "the only way to stop this evil is for all the red men to unite in claiming an equal right to the land. That is how it was at first and should be still, for the land never was divided, but was for the use of everyone. Any tribe could go to an empty land and make a home there. No groups among us have a right to sell, even to one another, and surely not to outsiders who want everything and will not settle for anything less. Sell a country? Why not sell the air? Why not sell the clouds and the great sea, as well as the earth? Did not the Great Spirit make them all for the use of his children?" He went on to say that he would never sell land, and the Shawnee would never sell land, which led ultimately to a conquest that was very brutal. Our speaker today is someone who has lived among us all of his life, a lifelong resident of northern Kentucky and of Cincinnati, and he is also a 30-year resident of Price Hill and a very close neighbor to John and Mary Tenzing. They're very good friends. Homer Shadowheart is also one of the founding members of the Urban Native Collective. He is an office manager for the Urban Native Collective as well, and he sits on the board of the collective with indigenous leaders from around the country. In addition to all of that, Homer is also a stand-up comedian, travels around to comedy clubs. And beside that, he's just a wonderful human being. And so we welcome Homer and the message that he has on Turtle Island and the Urban Native Collective. Homer?
I'll apologize first. We brought into town last night at the Northside Rock and Roll Carnival the world's only powwow punk band from Portland, Oregon. And I was at that concert last night and did not get home until about 2 a.m. So if my voice is hoarse or I clear my throat, cough, I'm not sick. I've just really liked the group. Our introductions can be long, so I'll try to keep this brief. My name is Homer Shadowheart. I am of Susquehana and Chippewa descent. I am the office and administrative manager at Urban Native Collective. I am a comic, I am a musician, I am an actor, I'm a writer, and I'm an activist. We at Urban Native Collective formed our organization on 3 focuses, those being education, health and fitness, and community and advocacy. Again, I was up late, sorry. guarantee I won't be as eloquent as Tecumseh. Our education program, we have divided so far into two avenues. We have an Indigenous Pages lending library in our community center in Northside. We have over 500 books with Indigenous artists, authors. I always say artists and it's authors. Some non-Indigenous authors that the books deal with Native culture, community. The space is open to all at any time. We welcome everyone. It's like we've never learned a thing. Our other educational avenue is our podcast, which is called Life on the Margins, an Urban Native Experience. We have discussed everything from working in white spaces, Indigenous motherhood, the parallels between what happened here on Turtle Island and what is happening now in Palestine. Our most recent episode dealt with the Butte Steiger Singers, who we got the chance to meet and be a part of when they played with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra in April, I believe. My memory's gone. Our health and fitness is a great passion of our executive director, Brianna Maslini Blanchard. She is a world-class rock climber and actually in the Indigenous Athletes Hall of Fame for rock climbing. We have a partnership with Climb Cincy, which is right across the street from us. We offer climbing programs to Indigenous youth of color to come out and climb for free, become part of our community, share some good times. Other avenue is a community garden, which we grow. Right now we're growing one community garden at Gorman Heritage Farm. Last year we fed roughly 35 families. This year we're hoping to double that as we've planted more crops, and it's ironic I get to go there and work and I don't eat fruits or vegetables, either one, so that's a joy. And all of these help to provide our avenues for our community and advocacy. Every event we have, we manage to pull more individuals from the Indigenous population in and show that we're here and that they have people to be around. Tim had mentioned I grew up in a very small town in northern Kentucky, and my family was the darkest there. But we were very well received. They loved my parents, which is obvious. My parents were awesome people. But you still feel alone when you're in the biggest minority in this country, which is weird because we were once the only people in this population. But we meet our community, we get in touch with them, and we've seen numbers that say that there are about 90,000 Indigenous people in the Cincinnati area. That's a huge number. That's like 1/5 of what the news tells us is at every event that ever happens in Cincinnati. Through the advocacy, we work toward getting rid of native mascots, which are damaging to our youth. We find out the real character of the community around us when we do things like protest a big Indian sign on Martin Luther King Jr. Day and have people yelling wonderful things at us. My favorite is always go back to where you came from. Soon as you do. A little about myself. As I said, I am Susquehana and Chippewa. It's very important. It was very important to my grandmother that I always mention the Susquehanna. The Susquehanna people once lived from the east coast of Canada all the way down to Illinois. In 1799, one of my ancestors, I'm sorry? Okay. In 1799, one of my ancestors survived a massacre of the Susquehanna people. Her father took her out every week in a different direction and said, when they come for us, come here and hide and travel by night. They came. They chased the last 200 members of the tribe into a church. They chained the doors shut and burned it to the ground. So you can imagine how nervous I am to be here today. She did travel by night for 5 nights until she came across a Chippewa hunting party. 5 men, and she was 4. The Susquehana, I like to tell people, were kind of like the Klingons of the native world. We were very fond of fights. So she picked up the largest stick she could find and tried to defend herself against these 5 men. As she was carried into the village, the men were crying, having heard the story that she told them. A friend of mine who says often that my very existence is an act of revolution, although I agree with that, I like to say we're not here because you allow it, we're here because we refuse to die. The Chippewa were very good to my family, obviously. My mother was born on the reservation in Traverse City in 1936. In 1938, the government once again relocated them to an urban area to try to remove culture and teachings. From Detroit, they moved to Chicago, and that's where my mother grew up. My grandmother, after my grandfather had left, he was an alcoholic. He knocked my mother's bassinet over and felt so guilty he left. Once they got to Chicago, my grandmother married a white man who would summarily beat her if she told any stories or spoke the language. I know none of my language for that reason. When I was about 11 years old, my grandmother moved 2 blocks away from my home, and my sister and I would go over every day and say, "Grandma, tell us something," and she wouldn't. She wouldn't. And we didn't know that once a native elder tells you no, that you have to drop the subject, because nobody taught us. So we kept going over. Grandma wasn't very happy about that. Finally, after about 2 months of us bugging her, she said, "Okay, check the house." I said, "Grandma, it's your house." She goes, "Check the house." So we checked the house, every room. She said, "Lock the doors and windows." So we went around, we locked the doors and windows, and we would then sit down and she would start to tell us stories. The one I just shared with you about the massacre was the first story she told us. As an 11-year-old, you can imagine it was a traumatic event, and it's one that I carry with pride, because I am still here, and I am still thriving. My medical history has not been great, but I have survived more things that the doctors said I shouldn't, that I'm in probably a lot of medical journals. I've gone a little off script, so excuse me. We talk a lot, and you may hear the phrase land back, and some explanation probably needs to be had with that. We're not actually saying give us our land back, which would be nice, but what we're saying is we need to get back to the indigenous ways of dealing with the land, that recognizing that the land is alive, that the air is alive, that the sea is alive, all the water is alive, and treat it as such. You wouldn't go to your best friend's house and dump garbage all over his lawn, but we don't mind doing that to, honestly, our best friend, the earth. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, you're just an environmentalist." It's like, no, there's a difference. We were born this way. But getting back to those teachings of respecting the land and never taking more than you need, putting things back where you got them. It's very simple. It's not a hard concept at all. And again, our center is open all the time. We're happy to talk to anyone about it. It's easy to do. And our lending, like I said, our lending library is open to everyone. We would love if you all came in. Check some books out. We got some nice couches. You could sit down and read if you want. A part of land back also, though, is the MMIW G 2S movement. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this. It stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. This is a huge problem in the indigenous community today. The number of Native women who have violence done to them is 10 times higher than the national average. A lot of these women go missing, and very little is done to find them. We don't see their pictures on the news every night. We don't see interviews with their families. Part of the reason for that is because by treaty, Native police officers are not allowed to investigate or punish crimes that non-Indigenous people commit. So when a non-Indigenous person murders, beats, makes a Native woman go missing, nothing's done. It falls to the federal government, and they're too busy to look into it. So we raise awareness. In May, you may have seen red dresses in all the Cincinnati libraries. We were very lucky that the library partnered with us. We hung red dresses all over North Side. It's such a great community. If you've not been there, I highly recommend it. But the red dress symbolizes, it's an empty red dress on a hanger. And it just symbolizes the missing women. The missing girls, our two-spirit relatives. It's a problem that we're trying to get out there. We've seen numerous television shows lately that address it, which is awesome because it seems like if it's not on TV or social media, it never happened. So getting it on there is great. Tim mentioned Ohio and the fact that there are now no federally or state recognized tribes that exist in Ohio any longer. There were once over 80 nations right here in Ohio. All were forcibly removed or killed in order to make way for quote-unquote progress. We have a friend who is a professor at UC who worked with the Wyandotte, who are now in Oklahoma and Kansas, create a virtual removal map. The last place they were in Ohio was right here in Cincinnati, on the banks of the Ohio. Next year there will be a historic marker going up at the site where the barge took them from Cincinnati to St. Louis, and then from St. Louis to Kansas, and from Kansas to Oklahoma. The reason we talk about this is because our schools aren't. And my wife and I talk a lot. My wife's a wonderful woman who puts up with me a lot. She's a black woman, and we talk a lot about the only way to make things better is through education. And it seems like systematically we are trying to remove those portions of education that we need to focus on the most. We're removing things about Rosa Parks, we're removing things about Tecumseh, we're removing any mention of massacres or race riots because we're embarrassed. Yet Tim and I were talking about this in Germany to this day. Every year in school, you get a full semester on the rise and fall of the Nazi Party because they don't want that to happen again. And you may think, oh, well, that won't happen again. Look around, it might. It's getting scary for some of us. And as I said, my people came actually from Canada, Pennsylvania, Michigan. I was lucky that my mother married a man in Tennessee who got a job with the airlines, and we moved to northern Kentucky so he could work at the airport. Again, I've been to my reservation. It's not, the casino's nice, but the living conditions aren't great. We talk a lot about third world countries, and they exist here on Turtle Island. They exist in Traverse City. They exist at Standing Rock. They exist at every reservation that has been placed in this country. Poverty levels are horrific. 1 in 10 houses have running water or electricity. And these aren't put in the best neighborhoods, so it's not like they have mild winters and cool summers. Air conditioning would be nice, I'm sure. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, and I'm sorry about that. I forget names a lot. Talking about voting, we are partnered with a group that wants us to get the word out there that democracy is indigenous. My little town that I grew up in, there were maybe 500 people in it. Our grade school went from grades 1 to 6, and there was maybe 100 kids in there if everybody came that day. And our principal was our headmaster and a teacher. And during our social studies courses, when we started our chapters on how America was formed and how the Constitution was written and things like that, he said, you know, every book we will open will tell you that democracy is from the Greeks. He said, that's not true. He said, our form of government was taken directly from the Iroquois. It wasn't until later in life that I found out that the Constitution was actually formed by 5 Iroquois women that were kidnapped and locked in the attic so they could ask them questions as they were writing. So, yeah, democracy is definitely indigenous. We wrote your Constitution. You're welcome. I say this a lot, though, and talks that I give, because I think it's important. When Standing Rock was going on, we saw people from every race, every religion, every orientation stand up and say this is wrong. When George Floyd was murdered, we saw the same thing. People of every race, every religion, every orientation stand up and say this is wrong. If we can do that when there's not a tragedy, imagine what we can accomplish. And that wasn't, when George Floyd was murdered, that wasn't even just in this country. We saw those protests worldwide. And land back is about indigenous ways. There would be no borders. We wouldn't recognize borders. There wouldn't be a wall at our south border. We would welcome people. If we had more than we needed, they would get it. If they had more than they needed, we would get it. It's really that simple. So we need to work like there's not a tragedy going on. And there is, I realize that. But work as if there are no tragedies. That all we're trying to do is make humanity better. To make ourselves better. You know, if I could treat everyone the way my dog treats everyone, it'd be great. She loves everybody, especially if you have food. But that's the world I want to live in. I'm 59 years old. I think I can see it. I mean, I'm probably going to live forever because I've cursed myself into that, but I would love to see that. Again, my wife and I talk a lot about we want to see a world where we no longer see a first. And people are like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, well, I want to see a world where we don't see the first black president, where we don't see the first gay president, where we don't see the first Native president, where all the firsts are gone because we've given the best people the chances to do what's right. Guys, I will leave you with what my grandmother used to say every time I would leave her house. She would say, may the Creator put enough stones in your path that you realize when it's smooth. Thank you very much.
Homer mentioned the fact that the Wyandot left from our riverfront. They were there with the Shawnee, but so was First Unitarian Church. We were there. We were eyewitnesses, but we did nothing. This was in the 1840s, 1844 and 1846, when the Shawnee and the Wyandot were loaded onto barges on the Ohio River. And it was a spectacle that everybody in Cincinnati witnessed, including First Unitarian Church. Our closing hymn is Ancient Mother, number 1069 in the Teal Hymnal. Please rise if you're willing and able. Howard, would you come forward to extinguish the chalice as I read our closing words? There is a tool to use. We belong to the earth. This we know. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. This we know. All things are connected, like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected.